Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for coming. This is a conversation with Rachel Beitarie, and my name is Brant Rosen. I'm the rabbi of Congregation Tzedek Chicago, who is the sponsor of our program today or tonight, depending on what time zone you're joining us from. Please make sure that you're set to mute. There will be an opportunity for folks to ask questions later in the session, but we're going to ask if people have questions to share them in the chat. And in the last 15 minutes or so of our program, we'll have the opportunity to present them to Rachel. But let's get started. Folks are still arriving, but we really want to take as much advantage of the time we have of the next hour. I want to express my gratitude and appreciation to my friend and colleague, Rachel Beitarie, the Executive Director of Zochrot, for joining us. The genesis of this program really was a thought that I had based on conversations that Rachel and I have had over the last few months that I found enormously clarifying when it comes to very, very deep and painful questions of the situation in Palestine, Israel, and the ongoing genocide. Rachel has a unique positionality as an Israeli, as the executive director of Zochrot, an organization that is involved in Nakba education and accountability. And it occurred to me that I would love to have the opportunity to share a conversation between us with my congregation and others outside of Tzedek Chicago that would be interested in listening in. And Rachel very graciously accepted that invitation. So with no further ado, we'll get things started. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. It's really wonderful to have you, especially grateful that you're joining us when it's 11 o'clock p.m. in Israel and only 3 o'clock here in Chicago.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Brent. I'm happy to be here.
So I thought we would begin with just a little bit of background information about yourself, because I'm guessing that most of the people here don't know that much about you personally. Maybe to say a little bit about yourself, to share your own background, and how you came to your own political and ideological understandings, and maybe a little bit about the work that you do, your organizing work and your work with Zochrot.
Sure, thank you for this question. I know we are all here to talk about Gaza and not about me. But I'll share a few things with you just to show how intertwined the story is with the Gaza Strip and with what's going on now. And it's impossible to understand the state of Israel without the Gaza Strip, actually, and without understanding the Nakba, and vice versa. So I was born not that far from Gaza, actually, about 25 kilometers in a kibbutz, a small community that my grandparents were settlers established there in 1941. And I grew up in a very mainstream religious Zionist family with a deep belief in the state of Israel and its justification. And where I grew up is located between the depopulated villages of Palestinian villages of Bashit, Sukrer, and Baraka that were all destroyed and depopulated during the Nakba in 1948, and most of the former inhabitants of those areas are, and the descendants, of course, are now in the Gaza Strip. This is where they were pushed to. And I'm telling this now as if I always knew that, but I really didn't. And I won't dwell too much into this. I think it's a whole PhD, how we are raised and grow up and live most of our lives in this state of denial, and how much effort it takes to not see what is right in front of your eyes, and that you are living on the ruins of lives of other people. And these are all things that I really didn't know and didn't think about the people who were still there when my family came to the area. And it took me many, many years to start thinking about any of this at all. I became an activist around the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin. I'm from the generation that came of age during the Oslo Accord, a more naive time. We were thinking that peace is right around the corner. A lot of people got very, very disillusioned at the time, and I was joining activists who were trying to stand in solidarity with Palestinian communities in the West Bank, in particular, against land confiscation and arrests, and when the separation wall was being built. And then I went to China, and I spent about a decade there. And that's not really part of the story, but this is where I came to understand things from an anti-colonial perspective more and more. And this is also where I came to know Zochrot, that was new then, and started reading and learning about the Nakba, and really about the history of the place where I was born and where I grew up, that I was lied about my whole life, pretty much. I came back, I heard, I think it's in the film Israelism, an American activist telling how she went to Israel but came back from Palestine. And for me, it was similar. I left Israel and came back to Palestine. And that was 2014, shortly before another round of attacks on Gaza started. And a lot of it came together for me at that time, and I started participating more and more in Zochrot's activities and learning and unlearning of the Zionist narrative. I was also participating at the time. I was part of an Israeli feminist collective. We were building a media collective on gender issues, and part of a collective that was involved in protective presence against home demolitions in the Nakba, the Negev desert of Palestinian Bedouin communities, but also of demolitions and evictions, not necessarily of Palestinian homes, but of Israeli families, a lot of single mothers who were evicted from public housing, and so on and so forth. And how I got to actually be part of the team of Zochrot is also related to Gaza, because in 2018, my friend and wonderful activist, Neta Golan, asked me to join her and try to organize solidarity rallies or presence at the fence with Gaza. And that was the time when organizers in Gaza were starting the Great March of Return, if you remember. And every Friday, thousands of people were walking towards the separation fence and demanding their basic rights under this brutal siege that lasted more than 10 years then, 16 years now. And especially the right to return to the places where they expelled from. And we were organizing weekly gatherings at the other side of the fence. It was usually near Kibbutz Be'eri. On a hill, just coming there and to a place where people can see us from the other side, until the army would arrest us or clear us from there. We were doing that for a while, and the right to return was really central to this organizing, and I think it was the first time in many years that an Israeli group was really organizing around this. And that's basically what brought me to Zochrot. Of course, those largely peaceful protests of Gaza were answered with brutal force, and over 200 people who were killed from Israeli snipers' fire. I was thinking about it today, of all the missed opportunities, of how things could have been different, how we could have chosen a different path then, and of course before that, and how we got to this point. So I have been director of Zochrot for almost 6 years now. And Zochrot, as you said, is an organization that has been working, especially within Israeli society, for over 20 years, doing Nakba education, offering tours to destroyed Palestinian localities to learn their histories, the circumstances of their uprooting, but more importantly, to try and envision Palestinian return and what it will mean to everyone who live here, Palestinians and Israelis, what we have to do to achieve that, and how it would be possible and how it would change us. We do that through tours and courses and workshops and media work and so on and so forth. So this is what I'm doing now.
So, Rachel, in preparation for our conversation, I sent to our mailing list an article in 972 magazine, the online leftist Israeli journal, that had a really very interesting survey of the Israeli left, and including Zochrot and other Israeli organizations, pointing out that Zochrot was among the few, if not the only, that were really taking on the issue of right of return, and affirming it explicitly. But as I was reading that article and just looking at the spectrum of the Israeli left, this was written before October 7th, of course, and on October 7th, just the landscape in every regard changed for Palestine, Israel, and Gaza most specifically, certainly. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about, for yourself, your perspective of how things have changed, maybe beginning with that date itself, when you've learned about it, your own evolution on coming to grips with what happened, and just processing it, and the ways that it affected your own thinking, but also just the way it's affected the country that you live in.
Thank you for that. I don't remember that much from October 7th itself. It's all a little bit blurry. I had some tasks that I was supposed to do and was waken. I live in the north, so I didn't hear any sirens. Most of the country was just woken up by sirens. But woken by a friend who called to ask if my family is okay, and I was, what's going on? Calling my family, yeah, okay, all in the safe rooms. There's a lot of bombardment, and it's pretty routine up to this point. It took me a while to understand what's going on, and I so first call, of course, to my parents, and then to my friend in Gaza, because I always do that. Whenever something is happening, I know there will be bombing on Gaza. And then I started scrolling, and I saw this photo or video, I don't remember, but you also saw it too, of the bulldozer tearing down the fence. And honestly, my first reaction was excitement. And it's something that I can't say in many circles now. But that was the first reaction, because this fence represents so much violence and harm, and it should have been taken down long ago. And I don't think I realized immediately what's gonna happen. And the rest of it was just a blur of hearing of friends who are, locked in their houses and don't know what's going on outside, and hearing gunshots. And then a son of one of my best friends that went to the party that became famous and was missing, and later confirmed dead. People that I know that we don't know what's going on with them, and how they are, and are they alive or dead. And it was all basically really shocking. In a way, I think everyone involved in activism always knew that in Israel that something like that could happen. And I remember talking about it as when we were going to protest near the fence, and riding through these dirt roads in the south. It's a very lovely area, very agricultural and peaceful, and that it just can't. It's not sustainable to have these flourishing, peaceful communities on one side and a starved ghetto on the other. And something's got to give, but of course I could never imagine that it will be like that. I have some family that was evacuated after more than 24 hours from their homes. And a lot of friends. I lost a lot of people I know that day. So first, it was just shocking and very confusing about something that we wanted to happen, the fence being torn down, but brought so much devastation. And so I think at Zochrot and at all the circles I'm in as an organizer, we were trying to find our footing. And the days after, I think I felt more Israeli than I have felt in a long while before October 7th, because I felt the pain of the whole society. It was also my pain. But the isolation, was very quick to come, as it was clear that almost immediately that there was going to be an unprecedented attack on Gaza. It's going to be worse than anything we have seen before. That was clear almost immediately. And with more and more voices calling to eliminate, to destroy, to kill everyone, to ethnically cleanse all of the Gaza Strip, to starve them. Those were heard right from the beginning, from the very first days. It was very difficult to maintain this connection to the harm that were caused to Israelis and to the pain and the grief, as it was turned into this urge of, unbridled revenge and destruction. So I don't think my views have changed a lot. I think I gained much more clarity about the situation here and about how unsustainable it is to colonize other people's land and to push them into ghettos, and clarity in insisting that we have to insist on safety for everyone. It's either everyone is safe or no one is safe, and that is the equation. And that's what I've been trying to organize around ever since. It took a while until we were back in the street protesting. It was pretty impossible at first. In the first couple of months, every attempt of protesting was, dispersed and suppressed pretty brutally. And a lot of people were busy with their own agony, grief. The first weeks for me as well, it was going to funerals and shivas, maybe mainly, and so it took a while to get back in organizing mode, and a lot of people started organizing for the hostages. Or organizing immediate assistance to the displaced people, the Israeli displaced. And stopping the war just didn't seem a priority for a lot of people, and it has started to change, but way too late. So it was isolating, and it took a while for us to come back together as a community and start building again some kind of resistance.
One thing, well, first of all, thank you for sharing this with us, Rachel. I'm sorry. I'm deeply sorry for your loss, and I so appreciate your ability to share what you're sharing with us. Something that I know, I'm sure, continues to be painful for you on so many levels. Just wanted to express that appreciation, and I know many who are here. Something you said to me in one of our conversations, and I've also heard from other Israelis too, and I'm still trying to wrap myself around, is that most Israelis don't really follow the news about what's going on in Gaza, or see the news, what's going there, or see the kinds of images that most of the world is seeing, and that most of the news they get is from Israeli media alone. And that sort of explains a little bit about psychologically how, that the communal isolation that's being felt. And another thing you said to me was that Israel is just experiencing October 7th over and over and over again, but not really moving past it. And I was wondering if you could just say a little bit about that, and maybe to clarify this phenomenon of how most Israelis just are not able to either willfully or consciously get news about what's going on in Gaza, or just actively don't want to hear about it. But I think that would be helpful for many of us who live outside of Israel, Palestine, to understand.
So yeah, if you only follow Israeli media or Hebrew media, you wouldn't know much about what is happening in Gaza, and you just wouldn't be exposed to most of what is coming out of there. But it hasn't started in October 7th. This ignoring of Palestinians and what they are undergoing is going back decades. if Israelis think of Palestinians at all. I mean, the mainstream Israelis, the mainstream media is through this lens of how can they harm us or not, or how can we stop it. Deep inside this enemy mentality, and it's pretty hard to shake, I think. And of course, the shock and grief of October 7th just added to it. And a lot of people said, I lost all sympathy to Palestinians. And I don't really buy it. I think people who said that didn't have much sympathy to begin with. I don't know. Activists that I know that were committed and serious before remain so, and that includes some people who lost family members and people who are very, very close to them. They pretty much remained where they are. But yeah, that's, I was mentioning the state of denial at the beginning, and when this is the state you live in constantly, it's very hard to shake off and to open your eyes to what is happening beyond this fence that we built that we can't see across. Now, yeah, October 7th, I feel like people are reliving it again and again, but there is, again, a deliberate effort to perpetuate this sense of shock, of horror. There hasn't been, by the way, any official, mourning or grief ceremonies. There was a lot of communities did that on the Shloshim, the 30 days mark after October 7th, but it was never official by the state. And I think there's this lacking of, mourning and somehow beginning to heal from this. And of course, a lot of families and communities cannot heal because they are still displaced and don't know what will happen next. And of course, people are still held hostages in Gaza. And we don't know if and when they will return. And the Israeli government, it seems, is delaying the resolving these issues as much as it can. It's not really working towards healing, towards a solution, but working towards more destruction and really very cynically using the hostages, the victims, as, how would I say it, as propaganda points or hasbara points to promote what it wants to do in Gaza. So yeah, Israelis are very isolated, and honestly, many just say openly that we don't care what is happening to Gaza. They should have thought of it before they attacked us. I don't accept that, obviously. But this is a very common view.
We were talking just before we began our session about the large rally that occurred in Tel Aviv, and that I'd like to ask you a little bit about that. But before, I'm curious. You alluded to the fact that you weren't doing much organizing in October, but that started. The left organizations are beginning to kind of emerge and doing organizing. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about that, how the left is mobilizing in this moment, and some of the challenges and dangers that are faced by folks who are not just protesting in the government per se, but protesting against the war and the genocide specifically.
Yeah, so that's a good distinction because there are huge protests right now, actually. And they seem to be getting a lot of momentum, but these are protests for the hostages and against the government, and not really against the genocide, or not even explicitly calling for ceasefire. I think at first a lot of the organizing was about protection of people here. Even some of us, some Israelis, very quickly we started to see phenomenon of doxing, exposing private home addresses, sending people to harass activists, but especially, of course, Palestinian activists. Either 48 Palestinian citizens of Israel that were right after October 7th, anyone who would, I don't know, post on Facebook anything that can be interpreted as sympathizing with Hamas, or not even just a verse from the Quran or anything like that, was arrested. There were hundreds of arrests. People were losing their jobs. People were expelled from universities. Different Israeli universities expelled over 100 Palestinian students. So a lot of the organizing was around this, provide some protection to everyone in harm's way, and of course continue to organizing in the West Bank when, you know, it's not on the news because what's happening there pales compares to the genocide in Gaza. But there too, under the cover of war, the situation deteriorated sharply there, and very, very quickly after October 7th. So some protective presence, activity with communities, especially again Bedouin communities that are being threatened by settlers and the army that are working together, that continues. And a lot of the organizing energy is going there, but still it's getting worse constantly, and we lost so far since October 7th 16 Palestinian communities that were uprooted, just packed up and left the land because they couldn't withstand anymore. Of course, there are arrests and killings and so on and so forth. So yeah, it took time to get back in the streets. There are now weekly protests against the war, at least weekly, and some other actions in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa. Palestinian protests started in Palestinian communities, especially in the north, only the last month or so. There is a very severe atmosphere of fear in Palestinian communities, especially, and it took time to start organizing back. Yesterday was Land Day, as you know. I think it was the first time in many months that there was a big demonstration in Dir Hana, Palestinian community where the original Land Day started. In 1976, and first time I saw a lot of Palestinian flags in here. Of course, you see them everywhere, but here. And marching and really some show of people's power in a long time. So there is organizing, there is coalition of Israeli organizations and groups called the Peace Coalition around calls to end the war, to reach ceasefire and start negotiations. It's ideologically we're not all on the same page, and we come back to the conflicts we had before inside the Israeli left. And I think it's mostly around the Nakba and where this started and what we need to do to actually reach an agreement that is allowing Palestinian liberation. Are we about Palestinian liberation at all? And life in dignity, or are we about Israeli Jewish supremacy and separation? So the lines have pretty much went back to where they were before, but with diminished power. I'm sorry to say, diminished power, diminished energy.
Is Zochrot actively doing its work right now? What kinds of work is Zochrot doing in this moment?
Yeah, we are doing work. It has changed a little bit, not that much, but at first the work was to create spaces for activists, for people who learn with us, who act with us together. Just together, we did meetings every week, sometimes twice a week, just for people not to feel so alone. And people would come and tell us, this is the only 2 hours in my week that I can actually speak my mind, because, the spaces became so hostile. And yeah, gradually these groups that were coming at first to share, from there we started organizing the protests, rallies, also other gatherings and learning. We just released a resource for Land Day that I think for many people here will be interesting. We started preparing it, of course, before October 7th. And I think it becomes even more relevant. It's focused on the JNF, Jewish National Fund, and its role in the ongoing Nakba and in dispossession of Palestinians. So it's an online resource with a lot of information and visuals and videos that you can check out. And we are working on testimonies. We have a series of testimonies from Nakba survivors, but now, unfortunately, we need to take testimonies from survivors of the current Nakba, and we started doing that, and continue doing workshops. It took us a while to go back to tours. We did some work online, virtual tours, and doing tours on the ground was pretty risky, still impossible in much of the north, but gradually going back there and continue to educate, because that's what we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine an organization that's devoted to educating about the Nakba and currently seeing the latest manifestation of the Nakba happening in such, in such an overwhelming way. It just feels like the work of Zochrot is all the more needed and necessary. But it's also interesting to hear you talking about the way that you're working in coalition with other leftist Israeli groups, and that you're not all on the same page about things. Including, I think you were alluding to when this all began, whether it was, October 7th or 1967 or 1948 or even earlier, and getting people to understand context without, I mean, this is something I think about and struggle with all the time, that it's so enormously important to have context, and that context does not necessarily mean that you are condoning violence against innocents. It just means we're trying to understand. We're trying to understand the environment that breeds violence. And I imagine that challenge in this moment is more challenging than ever. That whenever you make a suggestion that, well, actually, this has been ongoing well before October 7th or 1967, or pick your arbitrary start date, that the minute you begin to suggest contextualizing, you get accused of, being a traitor, being an enemy and you're shut down immediately. I was wondering if you had, thoughts or challenges that you face in that regard.
Well, yeah, I hear that all the time. People don't really want to hear about context. And again, context is not justification. I would never justify what some Palestinians did in October 7th, but I can understand how it came to be. And and again, many people in the left, and not just Zochrot, but many others, and even Zionist leftists have said for years that the policy against Palestinians in general, but especially in Gaza, is leading to a disaster. It's been said many, many times, including people who were living close to Gaza, and some of these people are sadly no longer with us. We were the ones talking about how unsustainable it is, how we must seize opportunities and push some kind of agreements and promote diplomacy and the siege first of all, and the Israeli government, on the other hand, for years strengthen Hamas, because that was the policy, to separate Palestinians. The goal was, and it remains even now, to prevent a Palestinian state. So strengthening Hamas in Gaza, separate Gaza from the other parts of Palestine, that was the policy. And this is what led to October 7th. Of course, there were many other factors, but I think this is the main thing. And well, you would think that this disaster would make a leftist view more popular in a way, that would be logical, but this is not really how the human minds work, I guess, or the colonizers' mind. At least, and I can see how the shock, the grief, the fear, there was really very real fear, are being manipulated towards revenge, towards show of power and destruction, and that breeds more and more and more revenge, because soldiers keep getting killed and lost. So I don't know when the time of reckoning will come, and yeah, it's an isolating experience, and it's difficult sometimes to live together with people who would tell me to my face that I'm a traitor and I should be sent to Gaza myself, and whatever. It's not that pleasant, but also I think that there must be this pathway, even for people, and I know people who are not just expressing opinions, but are involved in the genocide right now. People I know, people I love, people I care about, they are there, and they are convinced that they are fighting the good fight and protecting their country. And of course, I'm convinced otherwise. And sustaining this human connection for me is really, really crucial. And I don't think Palestinians can or should do that. See humanity in the soldier that are butchering them. I wouldn't ask this, of course, but I think someone should. And I think that someone should be us. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy or that I'm very good at it. I'm failing a lot. But this is the only way to leave the door open back to humanity and towards transformation. It's really what we have to do right now.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Rachel. You know, much of what you're saying resonates for me, and I imagine for many people here. Just negotiating this painful terrain that much more removed from what's going on directly, you know, for those of us in the diaspora. And I just know it's so enormously difficult and often feeling impossible. And I can't even begin to imagine for someone like you who makes your home in Israel, and as you say, have people you love, who you are, you know, who are part of your life. It's it's very, very almost unimaginable to imagine how we do it. But as you say, we need to keep working on our relationships. Um, that actually leads into a question that was shared. There have been some nice questions shared in the chat, and the first one I'd like to share is asking you, as an anti-Zionist, what do you tell people when they ask you, how can you live in Israel if you're not Zionist? And how do you deal with people who have turned against you?
So I talked a bit about I try to keep relationship as much as I can, as much as it's in my power. And I have a community with me of other anti-Zionist Hebrew speakers, and that's a great source of strength. And well, look, I was born here. My father was born here. The first of my family came here in the 1840s. We moved around a lot, but this is where we first came. I don't hold another passport, and I don't intend to leave unless I have no choice. Yes, my family came here as settlers. I grew up on other people's lands, as I guess many of you did too. And this is the reality of where I live, and I do feel connection to this place. I don't have anywhere else that I call home. Except here, I only lived in China for a while. And I want to see this place, Palestine, being transformed, being liberated, and I hope I will have a place in it. And I think we all need to work very hard to earn this place. So, so this is where I'm at, from dealing with the place of finding a home.
Thanks, Rachel. Um, Another question. How are returning Israeli soldiers dealing with their actions? Is there much awareness among them of their complicity in genocide? And that I would add to that, you know, I know there are groups like Breaking the Silence who talk about complicity, and I don't know the extent to which Breaking the Silence is active in this moment either, but you have thoughts on that?
It's a good question and a difficult one. I can't speak for all soldiers, and I guess there are different roles and different positions that they came with from home. I think there will be a lot of breaking the silence. It's already starting in a small way. But a lot of it is really, yeah, most people are complicit. Even if they talk of hardship, they talk about how difficult it is for them to, you know, um, execute in every sense of the word what they are required to do. How it's morally difficult and emotionally difficult, how there's not enough emotional support. And yeah, I think it will take time until people actually reckon with what they were involved in, unfortunately.
So I wanted to return to talk more about the increased protest that's the mass protest that's going on within Israel, and maybe if you could help parse for us a little bit about where this is coming from and what the goals are. We talked a little bit about this, that it's mostly focused on bringing hostages home and anger at the government, but not necessarily on what the Israeli military is doing to the Palestinian people in Gaza. But do you have a sense of the landscape of this protest? I know that hostage families are not unanimous, certainly, on this issue, but it looks like these protests are growing in number, and I'm assuming they probably only will as long as this continues. But maybe from someone who lives inside Israel to give a little bit of a perspective about the nature of these protests.
Right. So, of course, up until October 7th, there was, if you remember, a protest movement in Israel that was huge, like the biggest in the country's history, and was sustained over 9 months until October. And it, of course, pretty much died out completely after October 7th. But this is really the basis of this current protest, together with the protest for the hostages, for promoting a hostage deal. It took a long time. I think most people who were protesting before, for months now, people are not happy with the government, especially with Netanyahu. But feeling that it's not the right time to protest, that we need to all rally because we are in a war. And I have a friend who's a researcher, and he's comparing the situation now to 1948, this very extremely recruited militaristic society where the people at home are also see themselves as soldiers in a war. So if they're not actively on service, they will cook for the troops, or raise money for them, or do whatever they can to support. And there's all those articles are praising the wives of the people who are fighting because they are holding the home front, and all this kind of war propaganda that I think is really covering up for a society that is breaking apart from within. But I think now it has reached a point, and that's because of the behavior of the government. It's not of opposition to the war. Some people are also opposing the war, especially when it seems that it's not going very well, that it has been dragging for a while. The strategy is not clear, and there's more and more international pressure. And I want to tell you that international pressure work, and everyone need to keep upping the pressure. So the protests are about dissatisfaction with the government, who really looks very, even if you put aside Gazans' lives that most Israelis don't care about, the government seems very different. To Israelis in general, to the 100,000 displaced Israelis who still can't go back homes and don't know what their future is, to families of victims, and especially to the hostages. And the hostage families at first were working with the government and were in this position that, okay, we are calling for getting them home, but we're not saying how. So of course, no one would say, we don't want them to come home. The question is, the government tries to present it as the more pressure we put on Palestinians, on Gaza, the more the army will disrupt everything there. If we starve Gaza, that will bring back the hostages. Clearly, morality aside, of course, the very idea is just horrendous and illegitimate, but put that aside, it's also not working. And it's been 6 months now. And what is working and did work is when a deal was made in November, back in November, hostages did return. And they could have prolonged the deal and bring back more hostages, and they chose not to. And I think it was yesterday that many of the family finally lost it and went out against the government full on. So, and they have, I think, quite a lot of popular support, or at least a lot of sympathy. It's hard to come out against them. So that's, I think, giving more people who object the government some steam to also go out on the street. But it's going back to the same dynamics before October 7th of huge protests and small anti-occupation protests within it that insists that the occupation, the dispossession of Palestinians is in the root of all the other problems. And, if that would have been accepted as the, again, as the main message of the protest to begin with, we might not have been here now. So that was another missed opportunity, and it seems that it's going back to the same dynamics. So I'm not overly optimistic about this protest, but it's another stage of the unraveling of the Israeli state, basically.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on the hour. There's so many more questions to ask, but I want to be respectful of your time because I know it's late for you. But we have one question that I know that you've shared thoughts with me about before, that I think is an important one, which is what life is like for Palestinians Palestinian citizens of Israel since October 7th. And you alluded to it a little bit, and I know you've shared specific stories of friends of yours who have shared things on social media and have been arrested, but maybe a little bit in general about how this is impacting them.
It's extremely difficult. I mean, it's never been easy. And since October 7th, as I said, there have been hundreds of arrests. I know a student who got arrested because she woke up on October 7th and without knowing anything, just posted to her Instagram the coffee that she was drinking and wrote, "What a beautiful day it is today." and it was interpreted as supporting Hamas. That even if it was, it's still not a cause to arrest anyone. There were people who lost their jobs. There were students who were expelled. There's a famous singer called Dalal Abu Amne, who also wrote on October 7th, actually in opposition to Hamas deeds, but this is not how it was interpreted. She was arrested and the charges were dropped, but since then, for months, over 4 months, there were weekly demonstrations outside of her house, including bringing huge trash cans, putting them right at the entrance to her house, just to harass her children. She lives in a mostly Jewish town, to try to drive her away from there, calling to deny citizenship. That hasn't happened yet, but there are calls to that. And look, even before that, Palestinian society was inside Israel was severely demoralized. There is this infestation of crime that has gotten way, way worse under Itamar Ben-Gvir as internal security minister. Of course, he's basically encouraging crime and gangs and shooting within Palestinian towns and villages, and he definitely isn't going to put any resources into stopping it. So and this too has gone up this year. Last year was already the worst in decades, and this year is even worse. So it's a society that's very demoralized. At the beginning of the year, there were some attempts to organize protests, and people were arrested for months and are facing charges now for that. So it was only in the last months that our Palestinians are starting to organize Palestinian-led protests again inside the 48 borders, and that takes enormous courage. That's really, I can't imagine even, and we do what we can to stand by them, but it's very, very difficult.
So maybe we could conclude with this one question, and you, excuse me, also alluded to it in your comment about international pressure. But if you have any message or thoughts you'd like to share, or a charge, if you will, to us about how we can help and how we can best support the kinds of things that we've been talking about.
I think keep protesting, keep finding ways, follow Palestinian leadership, echo Palestinian voices, and center them. That's really important. It's a long run. It will take a while, and it will probably get worse before it gets better. Even when a ceasefire is achieved, we don't know what happens next. How do we even start some rebuilding of Gaza? And there are a lot of open questions. So keep doing what you're doing. We need to delegitimize this regime and do whatever it takes to do that. And if you have connections or relationships with people here, with Israelis, I think we need to hold each other accountable. You need to hold us accountable, but also try. And I know it's hard. It's hard for me as well, not to cut relationship entirely, but keep these doors open, right? שער התשובה אינם ננעלים. I don't know, maybe you can translate it.
Yeah, Yeah, that's a great place to close. The importance of using whatever channels of relationship we have to leverage, even the ones that are the most painful and difficult. Um, when the urge to isolate um, just feels like the path of least resistance to lean into keeping those lines open. So, well, I cherish the line I have with you, Rachel, and really I'm so grateful that you um, agreed to have this open conversation. And I hope the folks who joined us today, I'm sure they feel the same way. So we will consider this an ongoing conversation, of course, and just let me express what I know is in the hearts and minds of those who are attending right now, and our thanks to you, and also not just for spending time with us today, but for all that you're doing right now and all that you're holding right now, which I can just begin to imagine is enormously difficult every single day.
Thank you, Grant. Thanks so much for having me here, and thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you all for listening. It's been
Yeah,
a pleasure.
thanks.
And yeah, and keep up the good work. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.